In this video, I'm going to be talking about a series of books that is actually more well-known for its feature film adaptation. And the reason I bring this up so early in the video is because I kind of want to get it out of the way, first and foremost. I don't really want to talk about the movie all that much in this video at all. Whenever discussion of the Prydain series comes up, discussion of the film usually comes up, and I don't want to focus on that at all. I really just want to focus on the series itself and its own merits. I don't want to have to compare and contrast the books and the movie throughout the rest of this video. So I'm going to get this out of the way first and foremost. All you need to know is that in 1985, Walt Disney Pictures released the film The Black Cauldron. It was a feature-length animated film that was a very, very loose adaptation of Lloyd Alexander's 5-part Chronicles of Prydain series. And it didn't do too well. It was kind of a huge box office bomb for Disney at the time. It contributed to the 1980s being a very troubling time for the company, and I can see why. It's not that great of a movie. It has some nice animation, it has some very spooky fantasy elements that work pretty well, but other than that, it's really just kind of a lame duck of a movie. And so, much like Disney, I'm going to try to put that movie far behind me. I'm going to move on to much bigger and better things. Oh no! Oh no! Oh gosh. Well, anyway, hello there, fellow travelers. I'm Tim from Secret Fire Books, and this is Lloyd Alexander's Chronicles of Prydain. Oh boy. The Chronicles of Prydain was written by American author Lloyd Alexander and published between 1964 and 1968 as a series of 5 novels. During World War II, Alexander was stationed in Wales, where he underwent military intelligence training, and there he fell in love not only with the Welsh countryside, but also its cultural heritage, history, and mythology. Several decades later, he decided to write a series of children's books and based them off of the histories and legends that he studied during his travels. The result was Prydain, an ancient fantasy world that was full of monsters, magic, and the various heroes and villains from Welsh Celtic mythology. The story concerns a boy named Taran, who has the misfortune of being born as the typical orphaned farm boy who has some kind of mysterious past and grows up wanting nothing more than to see beyond his shallow horizons and experience the outside world. One day, when Henwen, the magical oracular pig that he's charged with protecting, escapes from her pen and runs into the woods, Taran takes off after her, and by stepping out into the unknown for the first time, he stumbles headfirst into an epic quest undertaken by the heroic Sons of Dawn as they fight against the dark forces of the death god, Aran. Now, I know that sounds like a very typical, cliche fantasy setup, but I promise it's not. Even though it does sound like the kind of thing that fans of fantasy nowadays, with their in-depth magic systems and their expansive world building and morally gray characters, would not enjoy reading, I guarantee you, if you give this series a shot, you will enjoy it. I think that even though it's a kid's series, even though it is geared toward children, and children will like the can't speak today. Even though children will like the sort of fantasy aspects, the adventure and the magic and the monsters and stuff like that, I think adults will actually get a lot more out of this series. Because I think adults will be able to sort of appreciate all the themes and moral lessons that take place in this story. In fact, the moral lessons were some of my favorite aspects of the story. But before we can get to that, I do need to talk about the characters. And we'll get to our main character, Taran, in a little bit, because when I talk about him, it'll segue very easily into the themes of the story. But first we'll talk about Taran's companions, this group of 4 companions that travels with him throughout the course of the 5 books. The first one is the Princess Eilonwy. Eilonwy is not only a princess, she is a sorceress in training. She has been raised by this woman who claims to be her aunt, but is also an evil sorceress who's training her to be her successor. And Eilonwy doesn't really care for her all that much, so she escapes from her castle and joins up with Taran and his friends on their adventure. And her whole quirk is that she is this very sarcastic, very talkative, kind of tomboy character. And at first, you could think she'd be very annoying because she's constantly talking, constantly running her mouth. But she's not really at all. She's kind of this comedic foil for Taran. Some of the greatest character interactions in the whole story are her interactions with Taran. Their discussions, their banter back and forth is really great. They kind of hate each other's guts at first, but they eventually become friends, and eventually a little more than friends, which that's pretty interesting actually. And so yeah, even though she could be perceived as very annoying, she is actually this very likable, very pure, innocent kind of character. She just really likes to run her mouth. Next, we have Fluter Flam, who has the most fun name to pronounce. Fluter Flam is a traveling bard. He claims to also be a king of some far-off country, but for all we know, he's just a traveling bard. He possesses a magical harp whose strings break every time he lies, which is quite a bit. He's very much like Geoffrey Chaucer from A Knight's Tale. He gives the truth scope, but he's a lot of fun to follow around. He's one of those characters who, as soon as he shows up, you're cheering for him, like, yeah, Fluter's back. And he could be perceived as very dishonest and kind of cowardly, but he's not. He's a very heroic, very loyal character. That's the running theme with the characters in this series. They are not always as they might seem when you first meet them. They might seem like they have some very negative qualities, but those are quickly outshone by their true character, the really heroic fiber of their character. Another great example is Gurgi. Now, I don't know what exactly Gurgi is supposed to be. I don't even think that Lloyd Alexander knew what Gurgi was supposed to be. He's this fuzzy little humanoid monster creature who follows Taran around, and he speaks in rhymes. He's obsessed with food. He eventually gets this magical satchel that never runs out of food, so he's constantly sharing his food with people, and he's very proud of that. But he's a very goofy character, and you would think that he'd be like the comic relief, but he's an incredibly loyal and faithful companion. His loyalty will go to extremes at some point, where he is willing to follow Taran into any situation. And if you could compare him to someone from The Lord of the Rings, he would be the Samwise of the group. His faithfulness knows no bounds. And lastly, we have one of my favorite reoccurring characters, Dolly the Dwarf. Dolly is awesome because he has really only one personality quirk, but they just hit it so hard that it makes me laugh every time it comes up. He comes from a family of dwarves who can turn themselves invisible by holding their breath. And Dolby is a very cranky, kind of cantankerous guy, so whenever he tries to get out of a situation, anytime he wants to get out of an argument, he just holds his breath. But unfortunately, unlike the rest of his family members, he can't turn invisible, and he's very upset about that. So just anytime he's in a conversation that he wants to get out of, he starts holding his breath, and nothing happens. And he gets very disappointed and very flustered. And for some reason, I just thought that was a very charming character quirk, and I laughed at it every time it happened. But much like all the other characters, deep down, he is a very caring, very faithful friend to Taran and the others, and he will follow them to any danger that they go through. But now let's talk about our main character. I don't think that there is any character in all of middle grade fantasy that has better character development than Taran the Assistant Pig Keeper. This kid starts off as an absolute loser. I mean, seriously, in the first book, he is just this whiny little brat who knows nothing about the outside world. He wants to be a hero. He wants to see the outside world and go on adventures and fight monsters and stuff. But he knows nothing about the outside world. He's never been in a fight. He's never even spent a night in the woods by himself. And he quickly comes into contact with a character named Prince Gwydion. He's looking for Henwen, this pig that he's lost in the forest. And he comes across Prince Gwydion. And Prince Gwydion is sort of the Obi-Wan Kenobi to Taran's Luke Skywalker. He's this mentor kind of character who has to teach Taran the ways of the world. And he has quite a bit of work cut out for him, because like I said, Taran is just a loser. He's totally incompetent in everything he does. Literally every character in this first book is more capable than Taran is. And so you think, how is this guy going to be the hero of our story? And he will get there. He will get there. He will one day be the brave, courageous, noble hero. But he's going to have to go through hell to get there. Something that Gwydion tries to get across to Taran is that heroes are not what Taran thinks they are. Heroes are not the characters who are the biggest, strongest people who are jumping into the fray with a sword and knocking some skulls together. Heroes are the people who are willing to sacrifice. Characters who are willing to lay down their lives for others. If there is any lesson in this entire series that is driven home further than anything else, it is that heroes make sacrifices. Heroes get hurt for other people. Heroes give up of themselves for other people. They are meek. They are humble. They are selfless. Forgive me for bringing scripture into this, but the meek shall inherit the earth. The last shall be first, the first shall be last, as a wise man once said. And that lesson rings so profoundly throughout all of the series. And step by step, book by book, we see Taran absorb those ideas and grow just a little bit more. We see him mature just a little bit more. And so he will eventually evolve from this bratty kid into a noble hero. But we have to see it in a gradual sort of way. Even though this is a fantasy story, and it's a very whimsical, magical kind of fantasy story, it takes character development very seriously. And that's why I say that even though kids will enjoy this series, I think adults will enjoy it a little bit more. Because I read the first book, the Book of Three, when I was a kid, and I remember the action and adventure and the monsters and stuff, but I don't remember the in-depth character building. And when I finally read it again as an adult and read the rest of the series, I really latched on to Taran and his growth as a character so much more, because this was the kind of stuff that I wanted to see from modern fantasy, but I don't get, because we're so obsessed with having morally gray characters and characters who are so flawed and so traumatized by past events that they never get over their trauma and they never actually develop as characters. It just really goes to show how much character writing has changed since the 1960s, I guess. We just really don't have that kind of character writing nowadays, that kind of moral backbone to our protagonists. I don't know if it's because we've become so cynical as a culture or because it's just gone out of style, but I wish we had more of that, because I really love seeing Taran's development. I love that this character starts out so clueless, but he keeps surrounding himself with people who know better, people who are older and wiser than him, who teach him these lessons. We see him absorb these lessons and put them into practice, and because of it, he becomes a much better person. He becomes a much better man. That's the thing. I think Taran is a very, very good, positive masculine role model. I don't think there's anyone who would say that they don't want their son to grow up to be the kind of person that Taran is at the end of the series. By the same token, I don't think there's anyone who would say they won't want their daughter to grow up to be like Eilonwy, because Eilonwy gets a bit of character development too. Not as much as Taran, but she gets a bit. She is a tomboy. She is kind of one of the guys. Any day of the week, she will jump in with a sword and, crack some monster skulls together. But that's not her purpose in the story. Her purpose in the story is to support the people she cares about. Her best moments are when she sucks up her pride and her egotism, and she puts all the sarcasm aside, and she just sits down with people and talks to them and connects with them, and she encourages them and builds them up. And it's just such a beautiful thing to read in a series that was written for kids, of all things. I don't know how Lloyd Alexander did it, but he just hit that nail on the head so perfectly, and I love it so much. Is there anything I didn't like about the series? I have some nitpicks. Like I said, Eilonwy doesn't get as much character development. There is one book, The Castle of Lear, that kind of hints that it's going to be the Eilonwy book, but we don't really follow her at all. We only really meet back up with her at the end of the book, and for the most part, we're still with Taran. So that was kind of disappointing, but it was still a good book. As far as other things go, I guess the villain wasn't that strong of a villain. Auron, the Death Lord, is kind of a non-entity. I guess you could compare him to Sauron from The Lord of the Rings. It's funny because their names sound similar. They're kind of similar villains. But Sauron, even though we don't see him at all in Lord of the Rings, we feel his presence constantly. We constantly feel like he's watching and that he's meddling in the affairs of the world. And Auron wasn't really like that. We don't really get to see his influence over the world right up until the end of the last book. We see his minions running around causing havoc. We just don't see that much of him or feel that much of his presence, I guess. So that was really the only other thing that disappointed me about the series. But once again, whether you are a kid or an adult, I think you will definitely enjoy Chronicles of Prydain if you give it a try. If you are a parent of kids who like to read, there is no reason why you shouldn't give them these books. They are very, very good. They have some really good lessons that your kids can learn from. And once they're finished with them, you should give them a read as well. Because like I said, I think you'll enjoy them, and I think you'll appreciate aspects of them much more than the kids will. But hey, that's just what I think of them. Please let me know in the comments. Have you guys read the Chronicles of Prydain? What did you think of them? And until next time, guys, farewell, and keep reading.
And check out Sand and Steel, available now on Amazon.com and SecretFireBooks.com. It's short, it's pulpy, and it's bloody as HE double hockey sticks. Reject modernity. Embrace sword and sorcery. Get your copy today.